I'm going to take you through the joy of making your own paper. It's such a relaxing, enjoyable, but also incredibly creative process, as well as the fact that you're recycling and reusing things that otherwise would have gone, to waste. So we're talking old envelopes, we're talking even, cardboard tubes, anything like that can be pulped down. And what it allows you to do is create your own fabulous papers, be it ones that you're going to use on your cards, like this, which has then got some lovely fibres encapsulated into it, or you're actually starting to make real artwork with it. So this has got real leaf captured in it, and then there's little specks of words within it and all sorts of different bits and pieces. It's just such a fun activity to do, and it's suitable for all the family. All you need, other than what you've got in your kit, is some water. So the first stage of your paper making is actually to prepare your pulp, and you can use any uncoated paper or card. So inside of toilet roll tubes, kitchen roll tubes, anything like that, they're perfect as well. Cardboard boxes, as long as you remove the tape. But what I tend to use is my scraps of paper. So things like when you've trimmed down from your mats and layers, you've got the little scraps, or if you've been making the books and you slice all those edges off, perfect. Or just, just scraps of paper that you find lying around. Letters that have been finished, junk mail, envelopes. So this is obviously a bank statement one. Just remove the window. It's not the end of the world if you miss it, because it just won't pulp down. And then you want to tear, cut or shred them up. The smaller the better. It just gets things done quickly. Into the pot, and then I've got warm water in there. It doesn't have to be warm water, but I find warm water makes everything happen quicker. And at the end of the day, we're not the greatest of most patients. So once you've got a good batch of paper in there, what I tend to do is make like a base pulp. So this will be a fairly neutral colour, avoid any bright coloured card, paper or anything like that. And from that I can take smaller amounts of pulp and do different things with them. If you just want to make a small batch of pulp, by all means do that. But this way it means that I can have a paper making session, make loads of different papers just from the one lot of pulp. So once you've got your amount of paper soaking in the water, what you want to do is leave it to soak for a little while, because the longer it soaks, the easier it is then to break down. So if you want to leave it overnight, excellent. It means that this process that I'm doing now, which is where I'm actually sort of almost crumbing it like you do in baking. So I'm sort of squeezing it together and then pulling it apart, and you can see it starts to go from sort of the noticeable torn bits into these little fibrous little tiny elements. And I keep putting it back in the water, stirring it round. So if you've left this to soak, this is easier. I haven't, so this is a little bit hard, not harder on the fingers, but I just got to work it a little bit more. If you want to really cheat, you can use a stick blender. The only thing with using a blender, apart from anything else, you don't really want to use your food one, so an old second-hand one. But sometimes, in my opinion, it makes the pulp too fine and you lose some of the character, I call it, which is where you can see flecks of larger pieces of paper. You can see a hint of print that you know you've recycled a book. So that's the biggest thing, is actually getting your pulp to the sort of size that you want to work to. So I tend to sort of work so that you can see it floating around in there, but then there's also some bigger bits. You can always keep working it. The easiest way is actually to bring it together, squish it in your fingers and then sort of roll it. And I say, a bit like when you're making a crumble. And then just keep putting it back in the water, and it will gradually break down into these lovely fibres. So if you haven't got a stick blender and you want an easy option, pop your water in with your paper here, pop maybe a couple of stones or something like that, put a lid on and give it a good old shake. So a bit like a pestle and mortar. But the other thing you'll find is if you feel, you can see that the water is starting to get a thicker consistency to it as the fibres from the paper start floating around in it. So if you notice that, what you can do is sieve out the bigger chunks anyway, and you'll get a finer grade pulp. But you know, this is looking like I could start using this. I have got a pot with more in, so that I can make and show you plenty of different sorts of papers. But you can see it's actually quite satisfying, this stage. And what you can find is that you could actually make a pulp like this and it will keep for a little while. I haven't tried freezing it, but I don't see why that wouldn't work. So this is why we've given you a pot with a lid on, because then you can keep this. Pop it in the fridge. What I tend to do is, if I'm thinking I'm going to be keeping it for a good few days, is I actually sort of sieve out the bigger chunks, put that aside, and then throw away the excess water, so that I'm not storing a load of water, because obviously that's where you're gonna it can go mouldy or whatever. But you're just looking for that sort of thin porridge soup type of look. But it's up to you how chunky you leave the bits. But I do like a little bit of chunks in it. I think it just gives your paper more character. But say if you don't want those, just either sieve those out and use them for another project, or just keep playing with it like this, and you'll find that it'll start to break down. And the longer it's soaking in the water, the better it is. And obviously as you break it down, the inner fibres are getting soaked as well. So that's your pulp. That is actually a really fun bit, and you do find that you sort of, it'll stick to your fingers a little bit, but that's fine. But you can get a feel for how it's going to work. So just leave that to one side, and then you want to prepare your work area. So I'm working obviously on a cutting mat. That's not important. You just don't want to be working on your best wooden surface, because we are going to be throwing water around. So what I have is I have an old towel, which gets used just for this. Just so that I'm absorbing any of the sort of excess. And then you've got your fabrics. So they are wool based, and this is what we actually create our paper onto. And so I tend to start with a stack, so that means that I'm ready for making my paper. These are reusable. You can wash them if you wish. I tend not to, but obviously if you're wanting to make a pale paper and previously you made a dark one with a mica, then give them a rinse. And the joy with these is these are what help you actually get your papers dry and things like that. They're actually quite an integral part, and they're just one of those things that you don't really think about, but actually you use them a lot. So that's got my work area, so to speak. I tend to work over an old bowl. You could do this directly over the sink, or on a nice sunny day just work outside. So the other thing I've got, the other important thing is your frame and your net. And then I just need my clips and my sponge. So you've got 8 clips. That's something for later. So I'm going to have my bowl to the side there, and that will come in when we need it. So preparing your frame. You've got 8 clips and you've got 8 little dents in your frame, and that just shows you where to spread out the clips so that your net is across the whole of the frame and is supported across the whole thing. Okay, so just clip them on. And if you need to trim down your net at all, because you know there's a few, because it is a natural, what's the word? Sisal. You know, you can just trim it down if it's, you know, overhanging too much, or just fold it over. So you want that across like that. So it ends up looking a bit like a tennis racket. If you've been making paper previously and there's still some elements there, you can just pick them off. Obviously don't throw them away, they go in the pulping pot. Right, so that's my net ready. My pulp is almost ready. I tend to work with a big pot of pulp and I just pull out a handful when I need it, okay? And then I have a smaller pot, these takeaway ones are really handy, or a jug or something that I just put a small handful of my pulp into. So depending what I'm doing, so the first one we're going to do is we're going to do a full sheet, so I'm going to put a good few handfuls of that pulp into that pot. I'm going to take one of our freshly made ones just to add a little bit, because some of this is still chunky, so I'll add a little bit of elements in. Okay, my sponge out to one side. I'm going to bring my bowl in now, and the nice thing with this is it will sort of support on it. So here's my pulp. Now, in order to get a nice even distribution of your pulp across, what you want to do is actually water down that. So it's gone from sort of porridge consistency to a soup. Okay, and all that's doing is it just means that you're not throwing too much pulp down at any one time, so you've got a little bit more control. So all you then start doing is you just start pouring over, and you can see the netting starts to catch those fibres. And by doing it this way, you've got the control. You can see where you're missing bits. So pour it slowly. So I can see I've got a gap there. You can hear the water running underneath. So just keep going round. So I tend to sort of draw out roughly the sort of size I want to work with. In your kit, you also have some lovely little scrapers that allow you to just tidy up your edges there. I, of course, have put mine somewhere safe, so I'm just going to do it like that. The other thing I do before I move my bowl is I just run underneath, and it just, can you hear some extra water dripping off? Okay. And also if you've got any little bits caught in the corner, it just allows you to do that. Don't be moving that around with your finger, okay? It will just stick to you, and it won't actually fill in any gaps. If you find like there you think, oh, I have got a little bit of a gap, just put a tiny bit more pulp in your pot, tiny bit more water, and you can just fill it in that way, or not worry about it. Your first couple of sheets you do, it's very much learning about just getting to know what the process is. But the joy with this particular craft is if you mess it up, that just goes back in the water and no harm done. Right, so once you've got it like that, you're going to move your bowl out. So now all your pulp is sitting on there. So get your fabric, flick that over. You see, so now the netting is on the top. And then all we're going to do is we're going to take our sponge and we're going to press firmly down, squeeze out any excess water, press firmly down. You can see the water coming up. And this is why we're working on the fabric, because that will help absorb some of the water as well. Okay, once you've done a good few presses, I'm not pressing overly firmly. You know, don't think you've got to have big massive muscles for this. You're just pressing down, and by standing up to do it and leaning over, you're putting your body weight over it, so it's not a huge amount of pressure. But if you feel that, you know, maybe your upper body strength isn't as strong as it used to be, or you're just worried you're not, you can always use a bit of weight, an old book or something like that, just to add a bit. But the important thing is actually squeezing out a lot of that excess water. Then I remove my clips, okay, just like that. And I tend to sort of leave them lying around, because if I put them somewhere safe, I'll never find them again. Move your frame, bat, paddle, whatever you want to call it. So then just give one last little press down. Okay. And then it's a case of starting to peel your netting away. So sometimes it will come away quite nice and easily. Other times you might, especially if the edge is quite thin, you might need to just help it on its way. Okay. And just ease it off that net. So just go slowly. If you find the paper sticking to your fingers, dampen your fingers, because obviously that will help. And then just start peeling away. If you see it start to catch somewhere, just catch it down with your finger and just peel away. And there's your first bit of paper made. And you actually leave it on the fabric, because while it's on there, see, I can pick it up. And the joy with that is I can pick that up, hang it outside on the washing line or somewhere there, and then you see the air gets round and it'll dry quicker. Because if you're leaving it drying flat like that, no air gets underneath, they take a lot longer to dry. On a hot sunny day you can have these drying at next to no time if you get the nice sunny spot. And you can literally just peg them up. Once they're dry, you can then peel them off the fabric. Don't try and move them off the fabric until they're dry, because at this point it's still very delicate. But you can see you've got that lovely paper. So I'm just going to put him to one side and we'll do another one. So again, bring my frame back in, and this is why I leave my clips lying around, because then I can just come straight in and I know they're all in the right place, if you know what I mean. So off they come. And this is, you know, you can actually get through quite a lot of pulp and a lot of papers drying. So you get 5 fabrics, so that should keep you, because what you'll find is after you've done a couple of normal bits of paper, you'll want to start experimenting and doing some inclusions and things like that, which is what we're going to cover in a second. So pop that clip on. Okay, so we're ready. Let's prepare some more pulp. So again, we're still working from our main tub, and I think we had about the right amount of pulp there. So what was that, 5 handfuls? You'll soon get to know how much is the right amount for what you're doing. If you feel that your paper's getting too thick, stop pouring. You know, you don't have to. It's easier to go and add more on top than it is to take away. So add your water. Right, let's do a very simple inclusion. Let's do a skeleton leaf. So I'm going to lay it onto my netting. Bring my bowl back in. So that's laying on the netting. And then again, I'm just going to start pouring. I'm going to do a smaller piece this time, so I've got control. Pouring over the top of that leaf. There's kind of a satisfying noise going on underneath as the water drains away. Okay. Just because I've still got some pulp in there, I'm going to go right round there. But I could have added in twines, you know, anything that you want, laying it on there. Now, again, I dragged that water from underneath, which allowed me to pick up that little bit of pulp that was still in the corner, and I can use that to fill that corner. Again, you would use your little scraper to tidy up the edge. And it's the magic flick. And you can already see that this is going to be nice. So again, squeeze out the excess. And I find adding the skeleton leaf at the first stage and pouring the paper around it just works better. But if you wanted to add things when it's on the pulp stage on the frame, obviously you can do. But this way, I can see where it is when I'm doing this bit, and I can make sure that I've applied nice pressure over the top of that. So again, you'll feel that as it's absorbing less moisture, you know that you're nearly there with this bit. Because the first time you heard me squeeze it, lots of water came out, and then, you know, it's taking up less and less. Don't worry about your frame getting wet because it's not being submerged. It will dry quite quickly. I mean, to be fair, mine ends up multicoloured, bits of paper stuck on it, but that just adds character to it. Just a couple more presses. Okay, and then just as before, so all I do is just run that finger along, just flick, 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 flick. There we go, and start to peel. If you see it catching, then just peel away, and there you've got that skeleton leaf encapsulated and captured in that paper. Isn't that pretty? The other nice thing to do with ones like this is when you've put your leaf down, is then take words from a book and arrange them, and then they'll be captured as well. Postage stamps are lovely. Anything like that. Twine, die cut flowers, beautiful. If you can die cut them out of something like a tissue that the colour bleeds out of, that's really nice. Okay, so again, that's ready to hang up, except I'm not putting them outside at the moment. I'm just putting them on the side. But if it's a nice sunny day, get them out there. Right, we'll do one last bit like this, and then we'll look at the paper shapers. If you want to do coloured paper with the mica powders, you can either sprinkle the micas on later, which is okay but not spectacular, but what you want to do is add the micas at the stage where you're adding the extra water, and you stir it well in, and what you'll notice is that you won't see the shine of the micas until your paper's dry, and then you'll get this lovely shimmer. The reason we use micas instead of ink is because when you use water-based inks, what happens is when you're squeezing that water out and the water's being sponged out and things like that, what happens is that colour comes out as well, and you get a very, very subtle colour. Whereas with the mica, because they're a sediment, they're captured inside the paper and you get a stronger colour. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at colour now, but we're going to use something natural. So I've got a natural tea here, and it's a beautiful member of the sweet pea family. It is a blue butterfly pea, and it has a really strong colour. So it's just, this is actually a natural tea. So look around at different things. So I'm going to position that in the middle there. And then I'm just going to take some tiny bits and just tear them up and put them around. Only the blue bit I'm interested in, because the colour that comes out of this is phenomenal. Because we're letting these dry naturally, the colour intensifies as it dries and it pulls out more colour. And I'm only going to do a small batch here. So I'm just going to get some pulp. Now in there I've just found a bit of windowed envelope, so obviously I didn't pull all the window off, but not a problem. I'm actually going to do a two-tone here, because I'm going to do obviously the flower that we've put on our net, but the other thing I love including is herbs. So I raid the cupboard, any out-of-date herbs, in they go. So there's a bit of mint. And what this does, so I'm adding this to the pulp stage. What this does is, apart from anything else, it adds those lovely botanical elements in, but also the colour again comes out of this and you get the most beautiful natural colours. Now, because my herbs are slightly out of date, they're very brown, but actually as the colour comes out you do get a lovely green tone come through. So experiment with what you've got in the cupboard. But you could do that as a single thing. You don't have to do that with the flowers. I'm just sort of trying to cover as much as I can in a short space of time. So again, just make sure that it's well agitated before you pour, so that everything's floating around evenly. So I'm going to sort of frame my flower and I'm going to go across the middle. If you've got something as delicate as a flower on your net, pour slowly so you're not going to disturb it too much. And just make sure that you've got pulp going over the top of it. so that it's going to be held in place. Another little bit there. Round it goes. Give it a little swirl because obviously there's herbs and things around the side there. Swoop across the bottom. Just get those last little bits. It smells lovely as well. So where we've put the herbs in, that could be seeds, could be lavender, could be anything like that. So back down here, flick across. And I don't know if you'll be able to pick this up on the camera, but that's already starting to pull that colour out from that blue flower. I'll try and squeeze this quickly so that you can see everything. And even though, I mean, I dread to think how out of date that mint is. Oh, it's only 4 years out of date. It's still got a lovely aroma. Lavender is beautiful in this. Look at your fruit teas. Even just coffee grains, anything like that, because obviously that's going to add a colour, it's going to add a texture. And this is what I was saying about the fact that you start moving away from making just paper. You're starting to make pieces of art that are a piece of paper. And honestly, it's so, I mean, this video I'm doing now, I could be going on for hours. I promise I won't. But I just want to get you enough so you can see the sorts of things you can do. Okay. So again, just start easing that off. Just patience at this point is a bit of a virtue. You know, occasionally I just go a bit fast and pull too much off. Ease that away. Okay, let me see if I can bring that in closer. Can you see already that colour's starting to pull out of that, and it has the most amazing look. And what I love with the green from the herbs is as it dries and goes away to the edge, you get this beautiful herb stained edge, which is just, no amount of inking would get it as realistic as that. It's a silly statement, it is real. But it just gives such a beautiful look. And this is why, when we come to do the paper shapers in a second, it's so important to not take something so beautiful as this handmade paper and then die cut it, because you lose that detail to the edge, especially when you've stained them like this. So that's your basic paper. So that's everything from inclusions, and those inclusions can be anything, to colouring. We've used natural colour there, but I say you've got micas to use. So just exploring those is endless, but let's just show you how easy it is to do the paper shapers. So if you have got any stray bits on your netting and it's still wet, you can just rub them off at that point. And right, as in everything that I do, none of that goes to waste. That can go straight back in your pulping pot. You know, have a second pot on the go that might be the ones that have got little bits of herb in, or, you know, have a bit of coloured mica or something in. You know, it's absolutely fine, but I try and avoid wasting any of it, because this is the whole joy of it, is I'm making things exactly how I want them. You know, so I'll just, you know, I don't need to trim things down because I'm making them a nice size. So this gives you a really nice size sheet, this frame. Not too big, not too small. Obviously small's easier because you can just use as much or as little as you want. Right, fold that round. Right, we'll do the envelope just because it is the cutest thing. Right, so I'm going to use a bit of herbs again. That one. Thyme. I think that had a really nice texture. I don't want too much because I'm only doing an envelope. Right, so again, take some pulp. Obviously the envelope's quite small, so you don't need a huge amount of pulp. She says putting the load in. I'm going to take that one we made earlier because that's still got some nice chunks in it. And on things like the envelope, I would be tempted to put in maybe a few little words or something like that. Add some extra water. always remember to give it a little stir. Obviously I'm using my fingers. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You know, by all means use a spoon or something like that. Now when you're using a paper shaper, have it close to the edge, just because you want it sort of, you want to make sure it's nicely supported. And then all you're going to do is you're going to start pouring your pulp inside the realms of the paper shaper. Okay. Just so you're really using it like a mould. This is going to be quite a thick one. Okay, so wait till it's all nicely full, and then I tend to give it a little wiggle as well. Make sure I've got to the little points. I'll explain why with the envelope in a minute. There we go. Now the only difference with this is I tend to hold it for a little bit longer to let that water drip away. A little bit longer than what I would normally. And obviously when you come to this bit, you need to remember to take your paper shaper off before flicking it over. And then it's exactly the same process. Now the envelope one looks a little bit odd at this stage, but if I find the one I did earlier, which is just here, I will show you it in a second. Right, so just squeezing off the excess. Try not to rush this particular part. This is, out of all of the bits, this is the sort of crucial bit, because that's when you're reintroducing the integrity of the paper. So basically you're reconstituting it. So flick your clips off. Put your frame out of the way. And so, because this is an odd shape, because it is a blank envelope, just take care when unnetting it. So that's just how it should be. Leave that to dry. I'm going to move that to one side. And basically when it's dry, it will look like that. This has actually got a bit of mica in this one and all sorts. I tend to use up the last little bits of pulp with the envelopes, but the herb ones are lovely because again, so yes, I could die cut an envelope, but you don't get this beautiful natural edge. I mean, there's a little bit there with a bit of word on it. And then all you're going to do is where the points are, it just folds up and there, and apply a little bit of glue, and then you've got the most beautiful mini envelope. So hopefully that's given you enough to get started, and really just fly with it. There is so much you can do, you know, colour, texture, all sorts of things. If your papers when they're drying aren't perfectly flat, just put them under a bit of weight and they'll flatten down. You can make them thicker, you can make them thinner. And say your first few that you make, you might not be overly happy with. Doesn't matter. Throw them back into some water and make them into something else. There is no waste with this. It is so much fun. So enjoy.